Well, happy Saturday, folks. The real Captain Kirk here. We're live from One Bethlehem Plaza here in downtown Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Here, it's hard to believe. Here, we're talking about the last full weekend of meteorological winter here, which ends on the 28th here. So, again, nice blue sky, chilly day here in downtown Bethlehem, overlooking Lehigh University here. I thought we'd do a quick recap here of year to date. So this is 1 January through the 21st of February. The weather trends here. So past 52 days. It's been coldest in 15 years, fourth coldest in 40 years nationally. So these maps here show the trends versus last year, but again, very, very cold, fourth coldest in 40 years nationally. Dry on a national scale, driest in 10 years, ninth driest in 40 years, so below average on that front. But cold and dry can mean a lot of snow, and certainly that's been the case. Snowiest in 4 years, 14th snowiest in 40 years. So again, above average snowfall here. And again, just crazy heavy snow from like Oklahoma to Virginia here. So they've been kind of some of the bigger winners this year. Looking at the Great Lake, because of the cold snap here this past week, which is just frigid, Great Lakes ice coverage has increased to 48%. That's the most in 6 years, 14% above average, averaged about 34%. So a big uptick here in ice cover here. Snowfall this morning is also actually quite a bit up. Last year, only 18% of the country. Winter was pretty much over here this time last year, but still 55% of the country with some snow on the ground here, and a lot of this will start to melt here. But again, that's the most in 12 years. So again, way above average for this 22nd of February here. Looking to season-to-date snowfall here, Northwest is picking up some steam here, but still down about 25% versus last year, least in 5 years. Southwest is the big loser this year. Southwest California and the Southwest area is least in 25 years. Here in the Northeast, up 79% versus last year, most in 4 years, still a little bit below average on a regional scale here, but we have time here for March to add to that total. Southeast, the big winner, up 298%, most in 14 years. South Central, up 59% over last year, most in 4 years. Even the North Central picked up some steam here. They're now 10% above last year, but still fifth least in 40 years, so well below average snowfall in the upper plains, upper Midwest. Looking at weekly snowfall trends. So now these bars show you where it's snowier than last year. So blues are snowier, yellows are less snowy. And the blue line is kind of a national snowfall index, around 260 some cities across the U.S. So again, that big week here was the number one week was the 5th through 11th of January. Number two here was this past 9th through the 15th. And number three here is ending today. So those are the three snowiest weeks so far of winter. We got one more big chance here, a little bit of a lull here with a February thaw, and then we'll see here to start off. March looks like it's going to come in like a lion here, at least for the eastern half of the country. With the colder, more wintry type weather, again, this pattern is not very conducive to tornadic outbreaks. So again, we're way down, 18% less than last year, 25% below average, least in 4 years for tornadoes. Hail, least in 3 years, way below average, 58% below average. Wind, we had a big windstorm here this past week that went through the Great Lakes, Northeast. Again, 50, 60, 70 mile an hour wind gusts. I think Mount Washington had a crazy high wind speed, over 150 miles an hour. But winds, still are down about 22% of last year, but they're still 13% above average. So again, we'll be tracking this all severe season long. Looking at last World Summer here, ending today here on the 22nd. Cold week in the U.S. For sure. 13 degrees colder than last year. Number one coldest in 40 plus years, so much below average national temperatures, except in the West. But on a national scale, very, very cold, number one. 51% wettest last year, wettest in 3 years, 10th wettest in 40 years. And snowfall up 169% more than last year, most in 4 years, eighth most in 40 years. So cold, wet, snowy, again, not good for retail seasonal sales. In fact, if you're watching some of the earnings reports that are coming out on Wall Street here, again, a lot of retailers are saying things have kind of cratered here with the colder, snowier pattern here to start the 2025. So some are even downgrading the entire year, which might be justified because we have a very challenging spring, summer, early fall pattern for our big retail supply side customers. Cold up in Canada as well, coldest in 3 years, 11th coldest in 40 years. Hot spots there in India and Brazil. Big map here again is trends versus last year. Inset maps are trends versus average. We look at this week here again, following a bit of a February thaw after a few weeks of just nonstop cold here. So this week about still 2.6 colder than last year, but sixth warmest in 40 years, so above average. Even here in the east, we're going to get some days near 50 here before it comes crashing down again. But enjoy the milder week here in the mid-Atlantic areas because it won't last. Snowfall down about 10%, least in 25 years, second least in 40 years, so much below average there. And dry, 42% drier than last year, least in 23 years, fifth driest in 40 years. So a January thaw coming here in late February. We'll take it. Next week is the start of meteorological spring, which is March, April, May, according to meteorologists. Sun says we've got 3 more weeks of winter, and sun's going to be right here. 8.3 degrees colder than last year, coldest in 6 years, 13th coldest in 40 years, so below average national temperatures, especially there in the Midwest, Great Lakes, and Northeast for sure. Map inset left there is the trends versus last year, which is just frigid in the eastern half of the country compared to the really warm start last year. In fact, last year was, I think, a top 2 or 3 warmest start to March in decades. Snowfall up about 298%, most in 7 years, 7th most in 40 years, so above average, a big uptick here in snow. We'll see about this. Again, this is a computer model generated, but a couple systems through the Central Plains, Midwest, and maybe another one in Mid-Atlantic. We'll see if that one turns the Northeast. Models have been hinting it might come up the Northeast coast. We'll see here. And some heavier mountain snows in the West. While precip overall looks like a lot, but is down 50% versus last year, least in 4 years, 15th driest in 40 years. So again, March looks to come in like a lion again for the eastern half of the country here. We aggregate these here, and it's going to be careful here because we're aggregating really warm with potentially really colds. The theme is going to be warmer for the Western Canada, Western U.S., and again, cooling trend for the central and east as we get into March. Europe doesn't look too bad. Again, above average temperatures there in Central Europe. If we look at precip trends here again, so again, this is just rain and snow across the entire world here. So again, kind of stormy there, and parts of the U.S. and even parts of Central Europe look to get a little stormier than they've been as of late. So folks, have a great week ahead here, and we will talk to you again this time next week.